Good morning, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This webinar will start in a couple of minutes. Good morning, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This webinar will start in a few moments. Good morning, good afternoon. This webinar will start shortly. Good morning, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this live event broadcasted from the Netherlands. We have participants from across the Atlantic and in Europe in a variety of time zones, so enjoy your morning coffee or afternoon tea while we get this started. Today you will learn more about how to be successful as a North American manufacturer in Europe. 3 topics are addressed in more detail: sales, HR, and logistics. Remco Buurman, CEO of the Holland International Distribution Council, will introduce today's program and the speakers and will moderate today's event. Remco, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much and welcome everyone at this seminar, How to Become Successful in Europe as a North American manufacturer. These are turbulent times at the moment. As we speak, the US elections are taking place. We have to deal with a COVID-19 pandemic. The Brexit is about to take place here in Europe end of this year. And all these events, they may have an impact on economic development and business development. Still, it's very important to look ahead and to be aware of the opportunities for your business. And one of those opportunities definitely is here in Europe. Europe still is one of the largest single markets in the world. About 200 million people living within a radius of about 600 miles. So that's a huge consumer market with a lot of spending power. Today, we have 3 speakers, 2 speakers from Eurodev and one of my colleagues of HIDC, the Holland International Distribution Council. And they will address several topics which you have to take into account when starting up in Europe. We will talk about sales. We will talk about HR related issues. And finally, we will also talk about setting up your European supply chain. First speaker of today is Mr. Emre Aykaç. He is the Vice President, Advanced Technology and Medical Markets at Eurodev, and he will talk about European exporting challenges. He will talk about go-to-market strategies, and he will also talk about the business development trends and impacts. Emre, the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Thank you for the introduction, Remco, and I would like to welcome everybody to this webinar. Thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Emre Aykaç, and as Remco mentioned, I'm the Vice President of Medical Markets and Advanced Technologies at Eurodev. Today I will provide you with more insights on exporting challenges, on the business development landscape, and market entry strategies that will hopefully help you become more successful when entering the European market. I would like to do a short introduction about Eurodev. Eurodev was founded in 1996. Our headquarters is based in the Netherlands, and our mission is to assist North American SMEs with a successful European expansion. We are active in multiple industries, from healthcare, retail, industrial, and advanced tech markets. And our business development services consist of sales outsourcing, HR outsourcing, digital marketing, and M&A consulting. Let's start with the next slide, in which we made an overview of the export stage classifications. Perhaps you are considering to export to Europe or are already exporting to Europe. These stages can help you reflect on the stage you are in and what stage you would like to be in. The classification starts from basically a reactive exporter with no capabilities to compete and export, drives business in a non-tech industry selling commodity products and serving a limited domestic market. So it's very reactive, answering on the requests that are coming in, and that can vary to being a committed exporter where you have well-developed plans, are expanding to other continents, and in which exporting is a substantial part of your total turnover. So how far companies will get really depends on how active and ambitious the company is in exporting. If we look at the why on the next slide, where we look at the international business development. On the next, we can see that when most people think, when they're talking about exporting, about financial growth, which is of course true. But when we look and sum up the benefits exporting has on a company's ecosystem, we can see that it is very substantial. When doing right, international business offers the potential to strengthen the whole body of the firm. In addition to financial growth, it allows companies to access talent and increase the potential of their human capital. And furthermore, it allows improvements and optimizations of the solutions offered and contribute to the reputation and competitiveness of the firm. And we have served companies that improved their product line in the domestic market as they've learned from exporting to other countries and continents. On the graph right, ultimately, this is of course all great, but if we look at the numbers where we see, this is a graph of US mid-sized companies over a period of 5 years, where when doing right, it shows that they're able to generate 37% from exporting over their total revenue. The next slide shows that it is not an easy task, even though international business offers tremendous growth opportunities and 75% of purchasing power is international, yet on average, 75% of the companies do not make it or do not reach their potential in Europe. 75% of all initiatives in Europe have failed. If we look at the product launches, if we look at the international hirings, if we look at the compliance, if we look at the foreign acquisitions, they do not lead to desired results. And 75% of companies entering the European market, they typically quit within 2 years. So we can say that the fail rate is very significant, and a big driver of becoming part of that 25% consists of understanding the needs of your customers in the target market. And we can see that in the next slide, where we can see two companies. And again, the 75% does not apply for SMEs. It also applies for larger companies like Best Buy and Groupon, where we see that Best Buy failed in Europe through having a poor marketing strategy and failing to notice that Europeans prefer smaller shops to large box stores. They also failed in China due to failing to differentiate its product line from local retailers and not adapting to local consumer shopping preferences, such as smaller, more conveniently located retailers. We're looking at on the previous slide still, we can look at Groupon, where Groupon made missteps in the Asian market because they staffed largely foreign managers. They had little understanding of the purchasing landscape, and the marketing tactics were not received well in the culture. So these are, again, two cases where we see that it's basically a misunderstanding of the buying behavior of the target audience in the export market. And this is confirmed in the next slide, where we see where research is being done among international business development managers, where we can see that the top two consist of barriers, which basically they can control. It is true, it is difficult to find a good local partner. Partners can be found, but finding the right one is, of course, the most difficult part. And partners are simply not found by going to a trade show or trade mission. It requires dedication, a well-thought approach, and actively going into the field. It can be realized, and there are parties that can help you in this process. And the second barrier that's mentioned are payment risks, which if there is something that you can control in a deal, it is a payment risk. And the third one, laws and government regulations, is applicable for everyone. When we look at the real barriers, we find, again, like the cases presented in the previous slides, it is all about communicating, knowing the knowledge, having the knowledge of the local market, understanding the language and the culture. These, when companies are analyzed, when fail rates are analyzed, these three comes up. So try to build a strategy around your expansion plan that aligns with the needs of your target market end users. In the next slide, we'll see that when developing business internationally, you need to consider many different factors. If you are new to exporting or in the beginning stages, it is also recommended to consult with parties that have an expertise. It can be more effective and cost less if you consult rather than trying to fix it afterwards. And on the slide, we can see that the circles, the outer circles, are the macro factors which you don't control and you have to deal with when expanding internationally to any country. The mid circle is called the mesocircle, which you somewhat control and is related to your industry. The inner circle is called the microcircle and are factors that you control and can design. In the perfect exporting world, the circles are matched and aligned to each other. In the next slide, we can see how this can be applied to the European market. And as Remco mentioned in the beginning, Europe offers tremendous growth opportunities, especially for US companies. Last year alone, there was a 12.5% growth of US exports to Europe, and this trend is expected to grow. When we look at Europe, although the EU is a political and economic union with a standardized system of laws, it's important to remember that it is comprised of 28 very different member states and 23 independent states. There are significant cultural differences between EU countries, and residents of each country have distinct product preferences and purchasing habits. EU countries also have different levels of wealth and disposable income, from affluent countries like Luxembourg and Germany to relatively poor countries like Albania and Romania. Income levels are not a good indicator to determine a market attractiveness. We've helped companies that are offering high premium, high price products, in which the most successful markets were Eastern Europe and the Baltic countries. So when you're embarking on your European export journey, you need to do careful research into the countries where you're planning to sell your goods and develop a good understanding of demand for your product and how it should be branded and marketed. In the next slide, we've listed the 3 most chosen market entry strategies for early exporters. There are a variety of ways to enter a foreign market, and this overview shows the 3 most chosen market entry for early exporters. We typically see that once companies select one of these, and once they build solid sustainable revenue, they typically move to a greenfield operation where they set up their own office and hire their own full-time employees. Later, more about that. We typically do see that many companies start with indirect exports due to the need for local partners as they have knowledge and market access to local markets. A market entry strategy can also be different per country. It depends on different factors such as ease of market entry, VAT, regulations, competition, and buying behavior. So this could mean that you could have a direct exporting strategy for the Netherlands, and perhaps having a strategic alliance in Germany would fit better with the purchasing behavior of your customers in that market. And again, each of the entry models are dependent on your objectives and available resources. It is important to choose a market entry strategy based upon the company's growth objectives. In the next slide, we can you can use a systematic framework that we use. As we saw earlier in the presentation, the first step is one of the most important steps and has caused many companies to fail. It is also interesting to mention that when we do business with our US clients, they typically want to skip part 1 and part 2 and dive directly into step 3, which is making sales, and of course, a very essential part, but a good preparation is half of the work and double the return. We use this framework at EURDEV, and this is a summary. So if you're interested in the full framework, let us know and we can email that to you. And a structured step-by-step process will ensure all steps are taken to develop, optimize, and ultimately make your expansion successful. We also see many companies pulling back their efforts or lowering their efforts once they engage on a partnership, but step 5 is really where it starts, and the way how you manage step 5 will also determine your level of successful, sustainable growth. So we see that companies that are fully committed, carried into the organization, are the ones that typically succeed. If we go to our last slide, we can conclude that the European landscape is definitely challenging, but with the right approach, with really listening to your target audience in those local markets, it can offer you tremendous growth opportunities. There are partners that can help you in this process. If you are considering to start, are struggling, or if you're looking to expand your current European presence, feel free to reach out. We can help with assisting and navigating your European business development efforts, or navigate you to our partners. Below you can find my contact details. Feel free to reach out if you like. Again, thank you for your attention, and stay tuned for the rest of the presentations. Thank you very much. Back to you, Remco.
Yes, thank you very much for your presentation, Emre. Maybe one question for you from my side. Are there any specific countries where you see most opportunities for American companies? What is the best approach when you look at the market?
Mm-hmm. Yes, Remco, good question. Unfortunately, there's no one answer to that. It really depends on the type of industry that you're in, the type of market that you're in. We do see typically that the UK is the first stepstone for American companies because of the language, because of the culture. It's an easier market to enter first. But that's really something that's solution-based and market-based. It's a case-by-case situation, I would say. Many companies often think, for example, Germany can be a good market to step, but it's also one of the countries that has the slowest adoption to the market. So sometimes it may make sense to start with other countries, build a reference, and grow your way into Germany.
Thank you very much, Emre. So for the audience and all the participants, I would like to let you know that all the presentations will become available after this webinar. Also, there will be a recording available, and as far as I know, we will send this to you as well. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A box on your screen. Then we will make a selection, and I will ask the questions to the presenters of today. Now, the next issue of today, and that's one of the topics where there is most difference, I think, between the US and Europe, and that is human resources management. Labor legislation in Europe is completely different as it is in the United States, and even between the countries there are a lot of differences. So our next speaker is Mrs. Monique Ramond. She's the Executive VP HR Outsourcing and also a member of the board of Eurodev. And she will tell you everything about how to manage your EU personnel, how to mitigate risk in European legislation and labor law, and how to create a flexible and scalable workforce in Europe. Monique, can you take over?
Your microphone is off, Monique.
Thank you, Remco, for this nice introduction, and thank you all for attending this webinar. It's my honor to take you on a journey in the European HR landscape. And lucky for us, there are still 25% which are successful in setting up their business in Europe. And we aim at earning the privilege to make you even more successful. As my esteemed colleague Emre already explained, the European landscape is very diverse, and this is represented in the landscape, HR landscape as well. The different labor legislation, cultures and languages make it more challenging to develop a compliant and agile HR strategy for US companies. As you can imagine, due to the complexity, assistance in setting up the HR strategy and execution for Europe is advised, and in my experience really needed to make sure that you are successful in expanding your business in Europe. Looking at this slide, the first slide, the outer circle represents a lot of topics with which an HR department needs to address in the US in the first expansion phases in Europe. The inner circle represents a part of the actual topics that can be directed by your partner in Europe so that they can assist you and make the life of the HR director or the HR department in the US a little bit more easy or less difficult, to be honest. If you go to the next slide, then global research shows that the European continent is a very interesting and promising market for companies who want to grow. But research also shows that a lot of the European countries are considered to be complex or difficult from an employer or HR standpoint of view. If you look at the slide, there you see a lot of known countries like France or Germany who have a difficult index in the complexity regarding all things joined with HR or employment. If we look at this slide, we can also see there are a lot of differences between the countries in the sense that some of them are really easy and aren't shown on this state. So maybe those will be a better choice to start first. The cultural difference between the hire and fire principle or strategy versus the very well-known protected employee culture in the European market makes it almost inevitable that knowledge of the local labor legislation is of real value for companies and HR in the assistance in the area can prevent a lot of consequences. If you are making the wrong decisions at the beginning, the consequences are used at the end. So, and that is shown recently. If you look at the global pandemic that that we are in the middle of, that gives us also an enormous chance as partners, as HR outsourcing partners, to step up the plate and show our worth to our clients by demonstrating how we can help them in these kinds of circumstances. Labor law was changing on a weekly basis, as it never is seen before in my total career of 25 years within HR and payroll. And this was really the moment where we could help and step up for our clients to help them mitigate through the risks during this pandemic. If you would like to learn more about the research, then please reach out to us and we can share it and make it available for you. If you go to the next slide, then we see that in this slide, there's also the situation where you can see that there are different perspectives on looking at employment or HR for Europe. There's a small example of the financial consequences, where you already see that I just mentioned 4 countries, but the social contributions in those particular countries differ from 70% till up till 40%, which makes a huge difference, of course, in costs. Those could be perspective or making choices due to those financial consequences. But there are a lot more which you can also look at. For instance, talent, where can it be recruited? Environment, if you want to obtain and keep good talent, you also need to make sure that the environment is correct. There are the legal and legislation consequences, of course. And there's also the cultural perspective as well, which makes it also really difficult to decide in which countries you would like to start. Considering this challenging landscape, it is nice to realize that there are partners that can provide you with models which maintain your wanted flexibility. And in the next slide, I will introduce the main models available on the market. If you look at the first model, it is generally called the PEO or HR outsourcing model. It is a model where the partner sets up an entity especially designed for employment. Some partners set up an entity in the particular country, and services throughout that entity are done for a lot of clients at the same time. And some of the partners set up an entity for the particular client, and then it's just your employees in that entity. If we look at it, there are several things that are important or characteristics from this model. One of is that you shift your formal employership to the entity, which means that you're no longer the formal employer, but the partner in case will be the formal employer of the employee. In this model, it's also not needed that you have your own permanent establishment in Europe, which is could be a lot of an advantage due to the fact that you're not in the stage that you want to set up a permanent establishment yet. In this model, it's also so that by becoming the formal employer, the total outsourcing of the HR employment will be done by the partner. So that will mitigate risk on liability and things like that. So that's definitely something that is bringing a lot of value. At the same time, although you're using this construction, the day-to-day guidance of the employees will still be done by yourself. So you are in complete control. If we look at the next slide, the ASO model is a more known model, to be honest, and is one of the models that is most used. And it's also a lot of used by companies who are already in the European continent and are already providing some employment. In this case, you remain the formal employer. And that way you are also are completely responsible and liable for everything that is encountering the HR, the employment situation. But it is definitely a most cost-effective model because you don't have to set up an entity you already had done that in the past, but you don't have to pay extra money to the partner to set up an entity. But on the other hand, in this model, there are only basic HR activities done by the partner instead of the total package. So there are some things you can challenge yourself in what would match most on your requirements and needs. It also needs an active approach still from the financial and HR department because of a lot of HR activities aren't taken over by your partner. You need to do them yourselves. And the liability, of course, and compliance is completely in your own hands. So you need to rely on your own knowledge in a particular country to make this work. In the next slide, we have a sort of newest model on the market. It's called the integrated model, where you see that the benefits of both models are somewhat combined. This is a recent model. It's not shown that much yet, but it brings the benefits, as I said, from both models. So we expect to see a growth in this model. In this model, you remain the formal employer, so it's also a criteria that you have your own entity in Europe. And you will be provided with the complete HR outsourcing activities and guidance. And that's a main value for clients who are already in Europe with a few employment people in there already, who are looking for more quality and jumping up in numbers. There's no one-time setup cost for setting up an entity, of course, so there are less investments, and there's no investment to be made for setting up an HR department in Europe, because your partner will act as your European HR headquarters. We often see this model utilized, as I said, by companies who are already have a sort of employment footprint in Europe and growing, but experiencing compliance and liability issues. In the next slide, I will explain what kind of HR activities can be executed on by the HR outsourcing partners, depending, of course, on which model you would choose. Most partners will indeed provide you with the basic administration tasks, such as salary administration, tax administration, through the most common model, the ASO, or also known as the payroll model. In my experience, however, most companies need more assistance to be successful in Europe after a while. Recently, for instance, we reviewed a lot of employment agreements and assisted with terminations, but also advised extensively on the reimbursement schemes available due to the pandemic. In-depth knowledge and accessible network is then of the utmost importance, but also setting up insurance and benefit plans are difficult due to the practical barriers as language and time zone differences. So what you see here is that some of those tasks are done in the ASO model, some of them are done in the HRO model, and if you combine them two, of course, you have the perfect picture. A few specialized partners are also able to help clients even more, and then on a higher or a deeper level, so to speak, as shown in the next slide. Because when setting up or developing business in Europe, more in-depth topics come to mind after a while. Clients are mostly looking for an agile but also a sustainable solution, of course, so that they can continue their success and growth. And people management is critical in that and is a factor in maintaining your success. So clients turn to specialized partners for setting up a uniform HR frame throughout Europe, although there needs to be a possibility to adapt to the local requirements as well. Only a few partners can provide these kinds of HR consultancy activities, and these are normally not included in the models that I just presented. So it's really wise to take this into consideration at the beginning when you are choosing your partner for expanding in Europe. In the next slide, I will present in short the benefits of working with a partner in this European endeavor, sort of a resume of what I've told. Why is a partnership valuable for companies who are thinking to expand in Europe, not only when you're starting to begin, but also when you're already arrived in Europe. If you look at it from a corporate perspective, the main benefit we hear from our clients is the minimizing of corporate and employment liabilities. And if you look at it from an HR perspective, then the main things that are mentioned are centralized management and domestic access and support on the local ground. And that's where also my esteemed colleague Emma told we have within, for instance, in our company, more than 21 nationalities, and all of us speak a lot of languages. So that makes it more easy, and we don't have to take into account the time zones, and we are used to having our calls with our US-based customers late in the evening. So that makes it more easy. If you look at it from a financial standpoint of view, then we also hear that being centralized, have your financial management centralized, and the activities surrounding it, that simplifies all kinds of things, also simplifies bookkeeping and budgeting processes. And that is a main thing for, of course, the HR department in the US to make sure everything is aligned with the US company as well. So if we conclude and we go to the last slide, and we are at the end of this journey through the European HR landscape, our advice would be at least to choose one central partner with exquisite knowledge of the European market to create less administrative and legal burden. And this way, there's no need for a permanent establishment, depending on which phase or stage you are in. And it will allow you to keep focus on expanding your business so you can and will be successful in Europe. We are at the end of the presentation. Please feel free to reach out to me personally if you would like to hear some more in-depth advice embarking on your European journey. And we aim to thank you for listening, and we aim to surprise you in what we can do. Thank you so much for listening, and I think the last part will be done by Jelle.
Thank you very much, Monique, for your excellent presentation. Question from my side. Are there any advantages of outsourcing your HR in the Netherlands? Why do you start in the Netherlands with this HR outsourcing?
That's a great question. Of course, due to the fact that we are in the Netherlands, we have a lot of experience in the Netherlands. But to be honest, if you look at the countries and the complexity within the countries, the Netherlands is in the mid-zone. So they are not part of the really complex countries, but still on the west side of Europe. So that makes it more easy to adapt. And of course, people who are expanding also are looking for logistics normally. And I think Jelle is going to tell a lot about it, but the Netherlands has specialized on that point. So I think they are really a nice country to start in.
Thank you very much. Okay. I see the questions are coming in. We keep them till the final part of this webinar, the Q&A session, because now we are continuing with the third topic, which is logistics. My colleague, Jelle de Rooij, Senior Manager Supply Chain Solutions and responsible for the West Coast of the United States, will tell you everything about the logistics landscape in Europe. He will give you a roadmap and supply chain considerations and also explain something about distribution models. Jelle, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Remco, and good morning or good afternoon, everybody. Very nice to be talking to you in more detail about the logistics landscape in Europe, the roadmap for entry, as well as the distribution models. When looking at the logistics landscape, well, as already mentioned, the European market is very diverse. And as a company starting in Europe, this is something to be aware of. And you also need to be willing to invest in your organization to deal with this situation and have a differentiated market strategy for Europe. But all it brings opportunities for sure. The next slide, please. When you look at Europe and designing a European supply chain solution, there's quite some market variables you need to take into account. Think, for example, of different levels of market maturity, fragmented markets, national compliance schemes, or VAT. So all these aspects you need to take into account in addition to the more practical design of your supply chain. Some country might be already up and running in terms of e-commerce and in a very mature market. Other countries are not yet. So that is very important to take into account. Next slide, please. I think this is a very good example that illustrates the difference between these markets in Europe. When you look at the expected delivery time, for example, for e-commerce shipments, this varies enormously per country, but also the percentage of consumers that expects delivery in 2 days varies enormously. So when designing your supply chain for the European market, this is very important information and also useful for the design. Next slide, please. This is also true for delivery methods. The preferred delivery method in Europe is during daytime at home, but you also see a difference, for example, in Italy or the Nordics, 86% or 68% likes to be delivered at home versus 9% not. So that's a big difference. Also in Spain, there's a need, or it's accepted that the delivery takes place at night, and in other countries that's not the case. So that's very important to know when designing your supply chain as well. Next slide, please. When you look at online sales in the EU, it's a very large market and a growing market, of course. But the biggest markets are Germany, UK, and France. And well, of course, the Netherlands is well located right in the middle of these markets. So when you have this information in the back of your head and when you want to start into the European market, well, let's look at some considerations and a roadmap you can achieve for implementing a solution. Next slide, please. First of all, you need to understand the market size, the regulatory environment, and setting a clear business strategy. This was already touched upon by Eurodev as well. And with that in mind, you will design a flexible and efficient operational structure. The key takeaway here is that logistics really is a business enabler for success in the market. You can only do it right once, you can only set it up right once, but also keep in mind that when you are able to achieve later cutoff times, it will mean more sales. When you have shorter lead times to the market, it will mean more sales. When you have a better customer service, it will mean more sales. When you have better value-added services or value-added logistics, you will increase your sales. So all aspects in designing your supply chain that will make you successful or not on the European market. Next slide, please. And of course, there's all kind of facts or background of your supply chain when looking at your sourcing location, looking at your customers, your lead times you want to achieve, your inventory setup. So all aspects of the supply chain, often fact-based, based on the volumes you ship from your production location to the end customer in the European market. And with that in mind, you want to design the setup successfully. Next slide, please. When you look at the starting many exporters, the starting point many exporters employ an indirect model. So you start shipping from overseas directly to your end customers. There's no direct customer contact at that moment. You don't achieve market data or receive market data. The distributors are serving more as manufacturers, long lead times, and even your customer needs to act as an importer of record, taking over all kinds of well, customs formalities. So this model might be working in the beginning of your operation, but at a certain stage, your operation will grow. Your customers will start having other demands about your supply chain. Next slide, please. And these are typical demands. So you can hear from your customers, your lead times are too long, or I want to order smaller quantities. Your competitor has higher service levels. So all aspects of the supply chain where you're actually losing business opportunities when you would be able to organize it differently. Next slide, please. So when you think about that and you are able to turn that around into another organization in other service levels, also making more margins out of your operation, then you can enter the market and gain additional business. And so there's a lot of opportunity to be held there. And the solution there is often to start looking at the direct model. You take control over the supply chain, and by doing so, you will be able to serve your customers in a different manner. Next slide, please. So moving away from the indirect supply chain model, looking also at the picture, you see you only have control on the beginning of the supply chain. You take control with the direct supply chain model, you have control over the entire chain, and you can look at the customer demands in a totally different way. And well, you'll be able to increase your business for sure, because your customers will be much more happy with your supply chain setup. So what kind of models do we have there, which you can think of? Well, let me show you a few. First of all, there's the direct model with a centralized stock in the European market, where you can have one stocking point and you can supply both your B2C customers, you can supply your distributors, your master distributors, and this really brings a good opportunity in setting up your supply chain for Europe. As a manufacturer, one back, please. As a manufacturer, you will also not be necessary. It will not be necessary to pay VAT. When you have a fiscal representation model, you can either do that through a tax consultant or through your logistic service providers, and you won't need to pay VAT. Also, postponement of duty payments is possible when you set up a bonded warehouse. So when you operate a bonded warehouse, you keep your stock in bond, and the moment you want to send it further to, say, Israel, to other non-European countries, you will keep it in transit in bond, and you will pay duty in that country. When you start selling to the European market, you can clear the product on outbound in the Netherlands. So it really gives a lot of benefit to the operation when having control of one stocking location. Next slide, please. Well, there's some other models you can consider. Often going direct, a traditional EDC model works best, but should you grow your business, when you have more volume to take care of, also when you have other customers in other regions, it makes sense to start looking at a different model, maybe regional distribution centers, which are then replenished by the EDC. But that's all models you can look at in the future then. It's also good to note that the distribution model depends on the industry. It's also quite logical, of course, when you are a food distributor in Germany, your warehouse most probably will not be in the Netherlands. But when you look at all kinds of other industry, consumer electronics, fashion, lifestyle, high tech, machinery, there's quite some markets that do have a European distribution center, because the operation allows to be run from one location for European market. Next slide, please. This is also a very interesting picture. The value-added logistics or the value-added services that are possible to be performed by a logistics service provider. It really allows the shipper to take care of their core business like sales and marketing. And the LSP really becomes a true extension of your business. Often these activities are also started with long-term commitments on both sides. And it really helps to spark innovation to continuously improve these kind of services. You can think of repair, or you can think of returns management, and it really brings the logistics process far further than only shipping from A to B. It really becomes an extension of your business. Next slide, please. Another example here is, for example, postponement, where you send generic stock from the Far East, for example, to Europe, and then you make the final product ready for the UK market or any other market by adding an electric plug or adding a manual, and you can do that as late as possible in the supply chain. Also, call center services, customer service centers can be run by a logistics service provider. They are close to your stock, they know your customer, so they can really act on your behalf as a customer service department. Well, with all these possibilities and with all this logistics capabilities in the country, why should you do this in the Netherlands? What is the main reason for that? First of all, market access. We're centrally located in Europe, and all these consumers are very nearby. Rotterdam is the largest port in Europe. Amsterdam is the second best connected airport in the world and the fourth cargo airport in Europe. A lot of integrator hubs are close by. Think of UPS, FedEx, and we're really in the sweet spot of logistics fulfillment. When you look at the trading activity the Netherlands does, when you look at all the import and export volumes, we're second behind Germany. So that really means we're punching above our weight quite heavily as a small country in Europe. Having these kind of numbers, it's definitely not only for our own consumption. And also, many other organizations like DHL, European Commission, World Economic Forum have named the Netherlands as the #1 logistics hub in Europe for many parts of the logistics infrastructure, or the rankings show that not only we say it as that we're good in logistics. So to summarize, the Netherlands is good in innovation and collaboration. We're the #1 entry point for overseas products, the #1 logistics hub in Europe, and all the consumers are close by from the Netherlands and also easily reached in 1 to 3 days from the Netherlands. And last but not least, also the VAT payment is not necessary in the Netherlands. You can postpone that, and that's something that is possible in the Netherlands, and in many other countries in Europe that's not the case. But we can gladly tell you more about that when you want to. So that's the story. Back to you, Remco.
Thank you very much, Jelle, for your presentation. A lot of information on your slides. And as said before, all the presentations with all this information will be made available to all the participants of today's webinar. We come to the final session of this webinar, which is the Q&A. The first one I can take myself. Of course, all the presentations apply for North American companies in the US and in Canada. You have seen the flags of both countries passing by in the last presentation. And Canada, of course, with the new CETA agreement, offers a lot of opportunities for trade between the EU and Canada. First question from the Q&A box. Maybe Emre, you can answer this one. Can you give an example of a success story of an American company starting up in Europe?
Yes, definitely, Remco. I'll try to keep it short considering the time, but I'm also very happy to share a case study of a success stories of our clients. Now we've assisted one client. They were manufacturing medical apparel based in California. Time difference, language difference. They were not able to manage the European market. Where they had a need for local management. It's important to know that we also, as Eurodev, we don't have a magic stick, but what we do see with companies when they are successful, they are very responsive. They have a very strong customer service, so very aimed at offering customers quick responses and facilitating them with the tools. One of this particular client, they had a B2B portal system. They were offering livestock management for their European customers. They were shipping products within a few days, so very responsive and very export oriented, as we could see in some of the slides. And together with our approach in making sure that we're able to penetrate local markets, together we combine our forces, and after 4 years they were able to step on their own feet, to have their own employees and have their own European office. This is based on the experience what we have. Of course, there are many more examples, but again, it is very important when a company wants to be successful that they're willing to adapt to the local market, and not only when it comes to the product, but also on their internal resources. Hopefully that helps. Yeah, you're welcome.
I think that's very very clear. But I think this is also a very nice question for the two other speakers. So, Monique, can you also give a nice example of a success story? Your microphone, Monique.
Thank you, Remco, for getting it again. I have a lot of examples as well. What we do see is that we see clients from all kinds of phases. I saw that in the Q&A as well. So we have clients who are really starting up with hiring their first managing director in Europe, and there's no one else in Europe employed at that certain time. To clients who already have 50 employees around in Europe in different countries, and starting up by making sure that everything is compliant and liabilities are at the place where they should be, and there are no certain risk. And recently we had a company which was Canadian based in this case, who was setting up all kinds of employment throughout Europe in 10 countries to be specific. And within the due of 2 years, they were able to set up in all the countries that they wanted to be in, and kept all the employment. So that also means that the employees were satisfied with the way that the employer was doing business with them, and they created real expansion in Europe and are still building. We are still working together with them, and they are now making the step to going global even, and we were able to refer them to one of our networking partners, in this case in Canada, where we also have a partnership with one of the experted PEOs there, and they are setting up there now as well. So they are going faster than they could ever imagine, and it's really nice to be part of that success.
Thank you very much. Before I go to Jelle, I ask one more question to Emre, because I want to finish, of course, with a nice success story. And now we also, someone asks for a story of failure. Emre, does it ever happen that you talk to an American company and you say, okay, you better don't do it, do not start to enter the European market?
Yes, Remco, we definitely do. We speak with many different companies, and what we'll do in this conversation, and we'll talk about what their ambitions are, and we'll talk about how they're set up. For example, if they're not compliant with, for example, the CE mark, or when they don't have any internal resources to support an export. We don't recommend them to enter in Europe. So it's really, we look at, okay, is a company able to compete in the European market as well? To give an example, I spoke with a company based in the US. They were, for example, manufacturing PPE equipment. It's very a tough market to enter at this point. So we also look at what is the level of competitiveness. Do they comply with the regulations, and do they have their internal resources aligned to support such an initiative?
And now for a final question for you, Jelle. We end with another success story. Can you give some examples, please?
Yes, sure. And thinking about examples from the West Coast, I think about examples from the beauty and cosmetics industry. Companies we recently helped in setting up their European supply chain. Prior to their Dutch warehouse, they were going direct from the US, and now with their Dutch warehouse, also including products like aerosols, where you need to take care of dangerous goods management. But with their setup in the Netherlands, they can now have their B2C shipments, they can have their distributor shipments all taken care of without setting up an entity through a fiscal representative. And they're really seeing their sales and the conversions grow by this setup. So I think that's a good example. And back to you, Remco.
Jelle. So we have come to an end of this webinar. It is almost 5 o'clock here in the Netherlands. It's 11 a.m. at the East Coast in the US and in Canada. I would like to thank all the participants for joining today. If you have any questions, please let us know. We will make the recording and the presentations available. And I hope to see you or to speak to you in one of the events which we have planned for the next couple of months. Thank you very much and hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.